Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The Harrington mansion rose like a monument to wealth and coldness. Marble floors that echoed every step, crystal chandeliers casting sharp shadows instead of warmth, and walls adorned with portraits of stern ancestors who seemed to judge every soul that dared breathe within those halls. It was a palace built on contracts, not love, and on that June night, beneath a sky heavy with dark clouds threatening a storm, that house would witness the most unlikely union of all. Ethan Harrington was 32, with a chiseled jaw, amber eyes that could melt or freeze depending on his mood, and a reputation that preceded every entrance he made. Ruthless in business, cold in relationships, devastating to the women who dared believe they could thaw him. Heir to a financial empire worth billions, he'd learned early that feelings were dangerous luxuries, traps that weak men allowed. His father, Richard Harrington, had hammered that philosophy into his head his entire life. Marriages are corporate mergers. Ethan, choose with your head, never with your heart. And that's exactly how he found himself at the altar that suffocating afternoon beside a woman he barely knew. Sophia Langford, 24, daughter of William Langford, a businessman who'd gone under financially after a series of disastrous investments. The deal was simple and cruel. Ethan would marry Sophia, saving the Langford family from complete ruin, and in exchange, he'd absorb the remaining assets of William's company, further consolidating the Harrington empire. During the ceremony, Ethan didn't look at the bride once. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon beyond the chapel windows, as if he were fulfilling a bureaucratic obligation, signing just another contract. But when the priest spoke the final words, and he was forced to turn toward her, something strange happened. A flash of recognition, not from the mind, but from the body. Sophia was trembling inside the white lace dress, the veil partially covering her pale face, her brown eyes shining with unshed tears. She was delicate, almost fragile, with brown curls falling over her bare shoulders, and there was a vulnerability so raw in her that for a second, just 1 second, Ethan felt something stir in his chest. He ignored it. He kissed her quickly, formally, feeling only the softness of her lips against his before pulling away. The salty taste of her tears lingered in his mouth. He swallowed hard and turned his back. The reception was a theater of fake smiles and empty toasts. Ethan drank Scotch whiskey like water, feeling the amber liquid burn his throat, numbing anything that threatened to surface. Sophia remained seated at the main table, head down, absently picking at her untouched plate. No one talked to her, no one included her. She was, in everyone's eyes, a commodity that had been purchased. When night finally fell and the last guests left, Ethan climbed the mansion stairs with heavy steps, his chest full of a toxic mix of contempt and something darker, a hidden desire he refused to name. Each marble step echoed beneath his impeccable Italian boots, the smell of white roses, which the decorator had scattered throughout the mansion as if it could mask what this really was. A business transaction invaded his nostrils, sickening and false. He stopped in front of the master bedroom door. His hand hovered over the bronze handle for long seconds. On the other side, he knew Sophia was waiting. The little princess bought and delivered. He turned the handle with unnecessary force. The room was bathed in shadows, lit only by candles that someone, probably the housekeeper Mabel, had lit in a pathetic attempt to create romance. Sophia stood near the window, still in her wedding dress, arms crossed over her chest as if trying to protect herself from the invisible cold that filled the space. She turned when she heard the door close, and Ethan saw raw fear stamped in those brown eyes. "The little princess has finally arrived at the castle," he said, his voice dragged by alcohol laced with sarcasm as sharp as a blade. He approached slowly, removing his tuxedo jacket and carelessly tossing it onto an armchair. "Sophia, ready for what they bought you for." Sophia stepped back, her back almost touching the wall. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Ethan kept advancing, the smell of whiskey, mixed with expensive cologne, filling the space between them like a dense, intoxicating cloud. He stopped inches from her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin, to see the small freckles dotting her delicate nose, to hear her labored breathing. His fingers found her chin, gripping firmly, tilting her face upward, forcing her to look at him. His amber eyes burned with an intensity that defied the coldness of his words. "Tell me," he murmured, his voice low and hoarse, each syllable loaded with provocation and something darker. How many times did you rehearse this role? The frightened virgin? The innocent bride? It's convincing. I must admit. Sophia tried to speak, but her voice failed. She swallowed hard, and Ethan saw the movement of her throat, the racing pulse at the base of her neck. I'm not acting. He laughed. But the sound came out bitter, empty. His eyes traveled over every feature of her face, the curve of her lips, the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, as if he were evaluating a painting at an auction. But beneath the sarcasm, there was something else, something he couldn't control. The desire that lurks when reason drops its guard. No? He tilted his head, his nose almost brushing her temple. His hot breath touched her skin, and he felt the shiver that ran through Sophia's body like an electric wave. Then tell me, Sophia, what do you feel right now? Fear? Disgust? Or maybe curiosity? His fingers slid from her chin to her neck, tracing a slow, deliberate line to her exposed collarbone. Her skin was soft, warm, and he could feel the racing pulse beneath his fingertips. Sophia closed her eyes, tears finally escaping and running down her cheeks. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking, don't do this. Ethan stopped. His hand froze on her skin. He studied her in silence. The tremor in her lips, the tears she couldn't contain, the way she shrank under his touch, not from desire, but from pure terror. And something inside him, something he thought had died long ago, began to crack. He released her face abruptly and stepped back. The cold air filled the space between them like an unbridgeable chasm. You're lucky, he said, his voice now without the provocative tone, just exhaustion and something that looked dangerously like guilt, that I don't force women, no matter how much I paid for them. He turned and walked toward the door, each step heavy and deliberate, but before leaving, he stopped, his hand on the handle without looking back. Sleep. Tomorrow you'll have your duties as a wife, but tonight, he paused, jaw clenched. Tonight, I don't have the stomach for theater. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Sophia alone in the darkness. Perfumed with false roses and broken promises, she slid down the wall to the floor, hugging her knees, the wedding dress spreading around her like a white cloud stained with despair. On the other side of the door, Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, closing his eyes tightly. The memory of her look, that raw, pure fear, haunted him like a relentless ghost. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. What the hell was he doing? Morning arrived wrapped in heavy, almost suffocating silence. The golden sunlight filtered through the velvet curtains of the Harrington mansion, but it didn't bring the warmth that brightness promised. Ethan woke up in the library where he'd spent the night in a leather armchair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. His head throbbed, but the physical pain was welcome, a distraction from the confusion reigning in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the trembling of Sophia's lips, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd pleaded not with elaborate words, but with that simple pleas that carried the weight of all human vulnerability. Ethan Harrington, the man who'd never wavered in a negotiation, who destroyed competitors without blinking, who considered emotions exploitable weaknesses, found himself disturbed by a woman he didn't even know. He got up, straightening his wrinkled shirt, and walked to the bathroom to freshen up. The cold water on his face helped clear his mind, but didn't erase the memory. When he went downstairs for breakfast, he expected to find the mansion empty. After all, Sophia would probably be locked in her room, avoiding him. But upon entering the dining room, he found her sitting at the table, still pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but dressed in a simple light blue cotton dress that made her look even younger and more fragile. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty plate in front of her, her hands clasped in her lap, her fingers so tight that her knuckles were white. Ethan sat on the other side of the table, the sound of the chair being pulled echoing through the hall like a gunshot. The silence between them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mabel, the housekeeper, entered with the coffee tray. She was a middle-aged woman with a kind face marked by wrinkles from someone who'd smiled a lot in life despite hardships. She'd worked for the Harrington family for decades and was one of the few people who didn't fear Ethan. She served the coffee in silence, but before leaving, she cast a disapproving look at him, a look that clearly said, "You crossed the line." Boy. Ethan ignored her. He picked up the coffee cup and drank in silence, the hot, bitter liquid going down his throat. But then something unexpected happened. He set down the cup and looked at Sophia, who still hadn't touched anything. "How do you like your coffee?" he asked, his voice neutral, almost indifferent, but there was something there, a clumsy attempt to break down the wall he himself had built. Sophia slowly raised her eyes, surprised by the question. Her lips parted, but she hesitated as if searching for a trap hidden in his words. With a little milk and 1 spoon of sugar, she answered quietly, her voice hoarse from crying so much. Ethan nodded to Mabel, who was still nearby. "You heard? Prepare it that way." Mabel raised an eyebrow, surprised, but obeyed. Moments later, she placed a new cup in front of Sophia. Prepared exactly as she'd requested, Sophia took the cup with trembling hands, bringing it to her lips. The warmth of the liquid seemed to bring a little color back to her face. "Thank you," she murmured. Not quite sure if she was thanking Mabel or Ethan. Ethan just watched. He watched the way she held the cup, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He watched the way her eyes closed briefly when the first sip touched her tongue. He watched the way she took a deep breath as if trying to anchor herself in that simple moment to keep from falling apart completely. And as he watched, something inside him began to change. It wasn't regret. Ethan Harrington didn't regret anything, but it was something close. A crack in the armor he'd spent his entire life building. The following days were strange. Ethan didn't return to the master bedroom. He slept in the library or in one of the guest rooms, keeping physical distance from Sophia. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore her completely. He saw her in the hallways, always with her head down, always silent, like a ghost wandering through a house that would never be a home. And each time he saw her, that crack inside him grew a little more. It was on a rainy night, 5 days after the wedding, that everything truly changed. Ethan was working late in his office, immersed in spreadsheets and contracts, when he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. He looked up and saw Sophia pass by the half-open door, carrying a glass of water. She wore a simple white robe, her hair loose and falling in waves over her shoulders. There was something in the way she moved slowly, almost hesitantly, that made him put down his pen. "Sophia," he called out, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. She froze. She turned slowly, her eyes wide like those of an animal about to flee. "Yes," she answered, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan stood up, walking around the desk. The rain beat hard against the windows, creating a hypnotic melody that filled the silence. He stopped a few feet from her, keeping his distance, but his eyes didn't waver. "Are you okay?" he asked. It was a ridiculous question, he knew. How could she be okay? Sophia blinked, surprised. "Yes, I'm fine." "Liar," he said, but there was no cruelty in his voice, just observation. She lowered her eyes, tears threatening to fall again. "What do you want me to say? That I hate being here? That I feel like a prisoner? That every day in this house is suffocating?" Ethan took a step forward. "Tell the truth. Always." "Why?" She raised her eyes, and there was something new there, not just fear, but anger. A small anger, but pulsing. "Why do you care about the truth? You bought me. I'm just another asset in your portfolio." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. He had no answer. Because she was right, he'd done exactly that. But hearing the words come out of her mouth, loaded with pain and resentment, was different from simply knowing. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "You think I wanted to marry a stranger? To be forced into this by my father, by circumstances, by the damn greed of our families. But you accepted?" Sophia shot back, her voice trembling but firm. "You could have refused, but you didn't. And now I'm here, living in a house where no one wants me, where I'm invisible." Where she stopped abruptly, biting her lower lip to hold back a sob. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing deeply. When he opened them again, there was something different in them, something softer. "You're right. I accepted. And I was an idiot that night. He hesitated. The words stuck in his throat like stones. Admitting weakness wasn't something Ethan Harrington did, but there, in that dark, silent hallway, with only the rain as witness, he continued, "I treated you like you weren't human, and that was unforgivable." Sophia stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Those were the last words she expected to hear from him. She began, but didn't know what to say. That night, Ethan continued, taking another step toward her, his voice still low, but loaded with something he couldn't name. "You said you weren't acting. I didn't believe you. I thought it was just another game. But now I see I was wrong." Sophia shook her head, tears finally falling. "You said I was pretending to be innocent, but I wasn't. I've never been with anyone, Ethan. Never. I'm a virgin." The world stopped. Ethan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He stared at her, searching for signs of lies. for any indication of manipulation, but all he saw was raw, painful truth in her eyes. "What?" he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. "I'm a virgin," she repeated, this time more firmly, as if she needed to convince herself as much as him. "I haven't been touched by anyone. Not by choice, not by love. I was saving this for someone who truly wanted me, someone who loved me." Her voice broke on the last word, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. Ethan stood paralyzed. Each word from her was a sharp blade, piercing his chest. He'd assumed the worst. He'd treated her with contempt, with cruelty based on assumptions he'd never bothered to confirm. And now, standing before him was a woman who'd kept something so intimate, so precious, only to see it dismissed by a man who saw her as merchandise. He took another step, stopping right in front of her, his hands lifted hesitantly, hovering in the air for a moment, before landing gently on her shoulders. Sophia flinched under the touch, but didn't pull away. "Sophia," he said, his voice loaded with something he wasn't sure was guilt, regret, or something completely different. "I'm sorry." She lifted her face, tears staining her cheeks, her eyes red and swollen. "You're sorry. Does that change anything?" "No," he admitted, brutally honest as always. "It doesn't. But I need you to know, I never would have if I'd known." He couldn't finish the sentence. The words died in his throat, swallowed by the enormity of what he'd almost done. Sophia stared at him for long seconds, and then slowly nodded. "I believe you." Ethan released her shoulders, stepping back, creating space between them again. But something had changed. The coldness was no longer there. The crack had become a fissure. "Go to sleep," he said gently. "And Sophia, you're not invisible. Not to me. Not anymore." She nodded again, turning and walking back to the bedroom. Ethan stood in the hallway, watching her disappear into the darkness. The rain still beating against the windows like his heartbeat in his chest, erratic, confused, alive. And as he returned to the office, a question echoed in his mind, persistent and disturbing. What did he really feel for that woman? The days following Sophia's confession were marked by a subtle but undeniable shift in the dynamics of the Harrington mansion. Ethan didn't return to the master bedroom. He still kept his physical distance, as if he feared any closeness might shatter the fragile balance they'd established. But something had changed in his behavior. He watched her, not with the cold, calculating gaze from before, but with an almost unsettling curiosity, as if he were trying to decipher a puzzle he'd never considered solving. Sophia felt the weight of those looks. Each time she entered a room where he was, she could feel his attention turn toward her like a lighthouse in the darkness. It was uncomfortable, and at the same time strangely comforting. For the first time since arriving at that house, she didn't feel completely invisible. It was on a Thursday morning when sunlight streamed through the dining room windows, creating golden patterns on the marble floor, that Ethan did something that caught her completely off guard. Sophia was sitting at the table, absently flipping through a magazine she'd found in the library, when he entered. She looked up briefly, expecting him to sit in silence as usual. But instead he stopped beside her chair. "Good morning," he said, his voice neutral. But there was something different in his tone, something lighter. "Good morning," she replied, her voice still carrying the hesitation of someone who isn't sure how to behave. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her, not at the other end of the table as he always did, but right next to her. Sophia felt her heart race. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne notes of cedar and spices, something masculine and intense that invaded her senses in a way that made her dizzy. Mabel came in with the coffee tray, and before she could ask, Ethan spoke. "Prepare her coffee with a little milk and 1 spoon of sugar." Sophia turned her face toward him, surprised. He'd remembered something so small, so insignificant. But he'd remembered. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and she saw something there, not coldness, but something that looked dangerously like consideration. "Thank you," she murmured quickly, looking away, feeling her cheeks flush. Ethan picked up his own cup of black coffee and drank in silence. But his eyes remained fixed on her. He watched the way she held the cup, her delicate hands wrapping around the porcelain as if seeking warmth. He watched the way she gently blew on the hot liquid before drinking, her lips forming a small O that made him quickly look away, jaw clenching. He watched the way she briefly closed her eyes when the first sip touched her tongue, an almost imperceptible sigh escaping. "Do you sleep well?" he suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Sophia nearly choked on her coffee. She carefully set down the cup, wiping her lips with the napkin before answering, "Sometimes the house is very quiet at night. It's almost scary." "Scary?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "It's too big." Too cold. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and forget where I am," she admitted, her voice low, almost confessional. Ethan was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "I can ask Mabel to leave some lights on in the hallways if that helps." Sophia looked at him again, eyes wide with surprise. "You would do that?" "Already done," he replied simply, getting up and leaving the room without another word, leaving Sophia alone with her heart beating irregularly and a strange feeling in her chest, something between confusion and hope. It was 2 days later that the moment happened that would change everything between them irreversibly. Sophia had discovered the library on the second floor of the mansion, a sanctuary of knowledge with oak shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with old and new books, classics and contemporary works. The smell of aged paper and leather binding filled the air, and there was something deeply comforting about that space. It was the only place in the mansion where she could breathe without feeling the weight of loneliness crushing her chest. She was sitting in a leather armchair near the window, absorbed in reading Wuthering Heights, when she heard the door open. She didn't look up immediately, assuming it was Mabel coming to bring tea, but then she felt a presence approaching, silent, deliberate, intense. Ethan stopped beside the armchair, so close that Sophia could feel the heat radiating from his body. She froze, her eyes fixed on the words on the page, but unable to process a single letter. Her heart raced, beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What are you reading?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse, almost a whisper that brushed the nape of her neck like a caress. Sophia startled, letting the book fall into her lap. She turned abruptly, finding Ethan leaning over the back of the armchair, his face so close to hers that she could see the small golden flecks in his amber eyes, count every dark lash, feel his warm breath touching her cheek. She stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Ethan smiled, not the sarcastic, cruel smile she'd seen before, but something different, something genuine, almost playful. He picked up the book from her lap, his fingers lightly brushing her thighs over the fabric of her dress, a touch so brief it could have been accidental. But that sent an electric current through Sophia's entire body. Wuthering Heights, he read the title, raising an eyebrow. Story of obsessive, destructive love. Interesting choice. Have you read it? Sophia asked, finding her voice again, though still trembling. "I have when I was 17, he replied, returning the book to her, but not moving away. Instead, he walked around the armchair and sat on its arm, so close that their bodies almost touched. "I thought Heathcliff was an idiot. He let pride and anger destroy the only thing that really mattered to him." Sophia stared at him, surprised by the analysis. "And Catherine, a coward," he said without hesitation. "She had the chance to choose love, but chose security instead and paid the price for it." There was something in the way he spoke, an intensity, a passion hidden beneath the cold surface that made Sophia feel as if he wasn't talking about fictional characters, but about something much more real and personal. "Do you think love is worth risking everything for?" she asked, her voice coming out softer than intended. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on hers. Then he reached out and took a strand of brown hair that had fallen over her face. His fingers slid along the strand slowly, testing its silky texture before tucking it behind her ear with an intimacy that made Sophia's skin completely tingle. "I used to think it wasn't," he finally said, his voice loaded with something she couldn't decipher. "But lately, I'm not so sure." His fingers remained on her ear longer than necessary, their tips lightly tracing the line of her jaw before pulling away. Sophia could barely breathe. Every nerve ending in her body was on fire, every sense amplified to the maximum. She could feel the warmth of his fingers even after he pulled them away, as if they'd left an invisible mark on her skin. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered, the vulnerability raw in her voice. Ethan stared at her for long seconds, and then, to her complete surprise, he laughed, a low, genuine sound that reverberated through the silent space of the library. "I don't know," he admitted, and there was brutal honesty in those words. "Maybe because you made me question everything I thought I knew. Or maybe because you're not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" Sophia asked, tilting her head slightly, eyes fixed on his. "Someone calculating, someone manipulative, someone who would use any weapon available to get what they wanted," he replied. And there was a touch of regret in his voice. "But you're just you, real, honest, and that's unsettling." Sophia felt tears threatening to fall. But this time they weren't tears of pain, but of something different, something she wasn't sure she should name yet. Ethan stood up, creating distance again, as if he realized they'd crossed an invisible line and needed to retreat before it was too late. But before leaving, he stopped at the door and looked back. "Keep reading, Sophia. And when you finish, tell me if you think Heathcliff could have been saved. I'd like to know your opinion." And then he left, leaving Sophia alone with the book in her lap, her heart racing, and the persistent feeling that something had changed irreversibly between them. The crack had become an opening. And through it, for the first time, she glimpsed the possibility that this forced marriage could become something more, something real. But as Sophia dove back into her reading, trying to calm her confused thoughts and the feelings beginning to bloom inside her, she couldn't know that on the other side of the door, Ethan was leaning against the hallway wall, eyes closed, trying to control his irregular breathing. He'd touched her hair. He'd felt the softness of her skin. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Harrington discovered there was something more dangerous than any negotiation or business confrontation. The desire to touch again and to never stop. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold details, a charity event organized by New York's elite, the kind of occasion where fortunes were displayed under the guise of philanthropy. Ethan normally hated this type of event. Fake smiles, empty conversations, people measuring each other by the size of their wallets and the weight of their last names. But this time, something inside him wanted to go, and not just go alone as he usually did, but take Sophia. He didn't deeply analyze the reason. He told himself it was just protocol. She was his wife, after all, and appearances needed to be maintained, but deep down, in a place he refused to examine too closely, there was another reason. He wanted to see her in another setting. He wanted to watch her outside the cold walls of the mansion. He wanted, though he wouldn't admit it out loud, to see her shine. When he mentioned the event during breakfast, Sophia almost dropped her cup. "A ball," she repeated, eyes wide. "You want me to go with you? You're my wife." Ethan replied naturally, though his eyes betrayed something more. "It would be strange if I showed up alone." Sophia bit her lower lip, nervous. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. Nothing that's suitable for that kind of event." Ethan had already anticipated this. "Mabel has contacts at some boutiques. She'll arrange something. Choose whatever you want." And before Sophia could protest or thank him, he got up and left the room, leaving her alone with her racing heart and a mix of anxiety and something that looked dangerously like anticipation. On the night of the event, the Harrington mansion was in an uproar. Mabel had helped Sophia get ready, styling her brown hair in soft waves that fell over her shoulders, applying discreet makeup that enhanced her natural beauty without hiding it under layers of artifice. The chosen dress was a deep navy blue, simple in its cut, without the excessive shine and ornaments that marked the dresses of high society women. The silk fabric gently hugged Sophia's delicate curves. The neckline was modest but elegant, and the back was partially exposed, revealing clear, soft skin. When Sophia descended the stairs, Ethan was waiting in the entrance hall. Adjusting the cuffs of his impeccable white shirt under his black tuxedo, he looked up at the sound of her footsteps, and for the first time since they'd met, became completely still. She was beautiful, not in the obvious, calculated way of the women he usually encountered at these events. All silicone, Botox, and ostentatious jewelry, but in a genuine, almost ethereal way. The blue dress contrasted perfectly with her pale skin, and the way she moved, hesitant, almost shy, only increased the charm. "Am I presentable?" Sophia asked, stopping on the last step, her hands clasped nervously in front of her body. Ethan took longer than he should have to respond. His eyes traveled over every inch of her, from the curls that framed her face to her feet in modest heels. When he finally spoke, his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You're perfect." Sophia blushed, looking away. Ethan approached, extending his arm. "Shall we?" She hesitated only for a second before linking her arm through his blank. The touch sent an electric current through both of them, a physical reminder of the growing closeness that had been developing between them. In recent weeks, the Plaza Hotel ballroom was transformed into a fairy tale setting. Crystal chandeliers hung from the towering ceiling, casting prisms of golden light over the elegantly dressed guests. Tables decorated with elaborate floral arrangements surrounded the polished marble dance floor, and a live orchestra played classic melodies that filled the space with an atmosphere of artificial sophistication. As soon as Ethan and Sophia entered, eyes turned toward them. It was no secret that Ethan Harrington had gotten married. The social circles of the elite fed on gossip, and an arranged marriage between families was perfect fuel for endless speculation. Sophia felt the weight of those stares like invisible arrows piercing her skin. She instinctively tightened her grip on Ethan's arm, seeking some kind of anchor. Ethan felt her tension. He lowered his head slightly, his mouth close to her ear, and whispered, "Ignore them. You owe nothing to any of these people." His warm breath touching the sensitive skin of her ear made Sophia shiver completely. She nodded, trying to appear more confident than she felt. They circulated through the ballroom, Ethan greeting acquaintances with the polite coldness that characterized his social interactions. Sophia remained by his side, silent most of the time, smiling politely when introduced, but feeling like an intruder in a world that would never truly be hers. It was when they were near the bar that the situation changed drastically. A woman approached, tall, slender, dressed in a blood-red dress that left little to the imagination, the neckline plunging dangerously, and a side slit revealing her toned leg with each step. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her tanned shoulders, and her red-painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Eth," she purred, her voice loaded with an intimacy that made Sophia's stomach turn. "What a surprise to see you here. And with company." Ethan stiffened beside Sophia, his jaw clenched, and she could feel the tension emanating from him in palpable waves. "Claudia," he said, his voice neutral, but there was a coldness there that Sophia had never heard before. Claudia. The name echoed in Sophia's mind. She didn't need to ask to know who this woman was. It was written in every provocative look, in every calculated movement. This was one of the women from Ethan's past, and from the way she looked at him, a woman who still considered herself relevant in his life. "So it's true," Claudia said, her eyes running over Sophia from head to toe with poorly disguised disdain. "You really got married." And to her, the way she said her, loaded with contempt and condescension, made something inside Sophia shrink. She felt her cheeks flush with humiliation. The urge to flee from that place, from that judgmental stare, almost irresistible. "Yes, I got married," Ethan replied, his voice still controlled, but there was a sharp edge to it. "To Sophia, my wife." Claudia laughed, a shrill, artificial sound that cut through the air like breaking glass. "Oh, darling. You don't need to pretend with me. Everyone knows it was a business deal. The poor thing must have thought she'd won the lottery, right?" She turned to Sophia, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Tell me, dear, did you use your virginity as a bargaining chip? Is that what secured you the marriage contract? Because you see, in a world where we all already know the game, using innocence as a strategy is, well, it's almost genius, don't you think?" Sophia's blood froze. How did she know? How could this woman know about something so intimate, so private? She felt her legs weaken, the room beginning to spin around her. Tears threatened to fall, humiliation burning her throat like acid. But before she could completely fall apart, Ethan moved. He released Sophia's arm only to wrap it around her waist, pulling her firmly against his body. The movement was so quick, so protective, that Sophia almost lost her balance. She instinctively leaned into his chest, feeling the solidity of his masculine body, the warmth emanating from him, the familiar smell of cologne that now calmed her instead of intimidating her. Ethan looked at Claudia with a coldness that could freeze hell. "Watch your words, Claudia," he said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "My wife has more class in one fingernail than you have in your entire body. And unlike you, she doesn't need to sell herself in pieces to get attention." Claudia recoiled as if she'd been slapped, her perfectly made-up face contorted into an expression of anger and humiliation. "How dare you?" "I dare," Ethan interrupted, each word heavy and definitive. "And I'll go further. If you ever address another word to my wife, I'll make sure every door in this city closes in your face. Is that clear?" Claudia opened her mouth to reply, but something in Ethan's gaze, something wild and relentless, made her back down. She spun on her high heels and walked away, the red dress swaying dramatically. Leaving a trail of expensive perfume and resentment, Sophia was trembling. She tried to pull away from Ethan, embarrassed by the scene, but he held her tighter, not letting her move away. "Breathe," he ordered gently, his mouth close to her ear again. "Just breathe. She's nothing. You hear me? Nothing." Sophia closed her eyes, trying to control the tears, trying to calm her racing heart. And then, surprisingly, she felt Ethan's lips lightly brush her temple, a kiss so brief, so soft that it could have been imagined. But that made her open her eyes immediately. "Let's dance," he said. Not as a request, but as a statement. Ethan led Sophia to the center of the dance floor, where other couples were already moving to the sound of a slow, melancholic waltz. He positioned her in front of him, one hand holding hers firmly, the other sliding to her waist, resting on the subtle curve just above her hip. Sophia placed her free hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in the muscles beneath the tuxedo fabric. They began to move. At first, Sophia was stiff, still shaken by the encounter with Claudia, still feeling the eyes of dozens of people on them, but Ethan pulled her closer, eliminating the space between their bodies until they were pressed together chest to chest, hip to hip. His warmth enveloped her like a protective cocoon, and gradually she began to relax. "You dance well," she whispered. More to break the silence than for any other reason. "Mandatory lessons in childhood," he replied, and there was a touch of humor in his voice. "My mother insisted that a Harrington needed to know how to behave in society." Sophia gave a small smile despite everything. "And do you always do what you're told?" Ethan made her spin gently before pulling her back against him, this time even closer. Their faces were inches apart, noses almost touching, breaths mingling. "No," he said, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "I never do what I'm told except when I want to." "And you want to dance with me?" she asked, her voice coming out lower than intended. "More than I should," he admitted, and there was brutal honesty in those words that made Sophia's heart leap. His hand on her waist began to move slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding along the bare back of the dress. His fingers traced the line of her spine, feeling the soft, warm skin beneath his fingertips. Sophia shivered completely, an involuntary sigh escaping from her parted lips. Ethan felt it. He felt the shiver that ran through her body. He felt the way she leaned even more into him, as if her legs could no longer support her alone. He felt her breathing accelerate, her chest moving against his with each breath, and he felt something inside himself shatter the last barrier of containment he'd maintained. He wanted her not as a conquered prize or an acquired asset, but as a man wants a woman, with raw, urgent, consuming desire, and more than that, he wanted to protect her. He wanted no one to ever make her feel small or insignificant again. He wanted to be the reason for her smile, not her tears. "Ethan," Sophia whispered, her eyes fixed on his, and there was a silent question there, a hesitant surrender. He leaned in, his nose brushing her cheek, his mouth close to her ear. "You have no idea what you're doing to me, do you?" I'm not doing anything," she replied, her voice trembling. "Exactly," he murmured, his lips lightly brushing the line of her jaw. "You're not doing anything, and that's the problem. You just exist. And I can't stop." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because in that moment, as they danced in the middle of hundreds of people, as the world continued spinning around them, they were completely alone, lost in each other, in the undeniable tension that grew with each second, each touch, each shared breath. When the music ended, Ethan didn't release her immediately. He kept her there against him for a few more precious seconds, memorizing the feeling of her body against his, the scent of her soft perfume, the sound of her accelerated breathing. And when he finally released her, and they returned to the table, something fundamental had changed between them. It was no longer just physical attraction. It was no longer just curiosity or consideration. It was the beginning of something much more dangerous, something neither of them was prepared to face. The days following the ball were marked by a different kind of tension, not the cold, distant tension that had characterized the beginning of the marriage, but something warmer, more visceral, more impossible to ignore. Ethan could no longer maintain the distance he'd established. It was as if something had broken that night on the dance floor, as if the mask of indifference he'd worn for so long had finally cracked beyond repair. He found himself looking for her not deliberately, or at least that's what he told himself, but in ways that seemed casual, coincidences that repeated themselves with a frequency that defied any logic. If she was in the garden in the morning, walking among the rose bushes that Mabel cultivated so lovingly, he suddenly needed to check something in the gazebo at the back. If she was in the library in the afternoon, lost in the pages of some novel, he remembered a specific book he needed to consult right on the shelf next to the armchair where she sat. Sophia had noticed, too. It would be impossible not to notice. Every time she entered a room and found him there, their eyes met for a moment, suspended in time. A moment where neither looked away, where the air seemed to become denser, more charged with something unspoken but deeply felt. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, when the autumn sun painted the sky in orange and golden tones, that Ethan found her in the garden again. Sophia was kneeling on the grass, her hands dirty with soil, planting purple tulips in a bed near the stone wall. She wore a simple white cotton dress with small printed flowers, and her hair was tied in a loose bun that allowed some rebellious strands to fall over her face. There was something so natural, so genuine about that scene, that Ethan stopped in the middle of the stone path just to watch her. The sun illuminated her profile, highlighting the soft curve of her cheek, the delicate contour of her nose, the graceful line of her neck. She was humming softly, a melody he didn't recognize, but that was soft and melancholic, like a forgotten lullaby. And there was a small smile, almost imperceptible on her lips as she worked in the soil, as if that simple act of planting flowers brought a joy she rarely allowed to overflow. "Do you like gardening?" Ethan asked, his voice cutting through the silence and making Sophia startle. She turned her head quickly, eyes wide with surprise. Yes, I always have. When I was a child, I helped my grandmother in her garden. It was the most beautiful place in the world." Ethan approached, hands in his dress pants pockets, observing the seedlings already planted. "Purple tulips any special meaning?" Sophia blushed slightly, returning her attention to the soil. "They represent royalty, but also new beginnings. I thought it was appropriate." "New beginnings," Ethan repeated, his voice lower. He crouched down beside her, not caring that his expensive pants touched the damp grass. "Do you believe in new beginnings?" Sophia stopped digging, her hands still on the soil. She glanced at him sideways, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "I have to believe. Otherwise, what else is there?" Ethan was silent for a moment, processing her words. Then, to Sophia's complete surprise, he extended his hand. "Teach me." "Teach you what?" she asked, confused. "To plant. I've never done this before." Sophia blinked, incredulous. Ethan Harrington, the man who commanded a financial empire, who had the power to make or destroy companies with a single decision, was asking to learn how to plant flowers. There was something so incongruous, so unexpectedly human about it, that she couldn't contain a genuine smile, the first true smile he'd seen on her face. "Okay," she said softly. "Take a seedling." Ethan took one of the small plants, holding it with excessive care, as if it was something extremely fragile. Sophia laughed softly, and the sound of that laughter, light, genuine, free, made something in Ethan's chest tighten. "It's not made of glass," she teased. "You can hold it firmly." She took his hands, the large, strong hands marked by small calluses from someone who practiced boxing regularly, and guided them, showing how to make the hole in the soil, how to position the root, how to cover it carefully. Her small hands, dirty with soil, on his. The touch was simple, functional, but there was an intimacy in it that transcended any logical explanation. Ethan was mesmerized not by the task, but by the proximity, by the smell of fresh soil mixed with her soft perfume, something floral and discreet that seemed to be part of Sophia's essence, by the way she bit her lower lip while concentrating, by the way she unconsciously leaned closer to him until their shoulders touched. When the seedling was finally planted, Sophia pulled back slightly, admiring the work. "Don your first tulip." Ethan looked at the small plant, but his eyes quickly returned to Sophia. "Thank you." "You're welcome," she replied, still smiling. They stayed there, kneeling on the grass, looking at each other as the sun continued its descent on the horizon, painting everything golden. And in that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding, a mutual recognition that the barriers were falling, that the distance they'd so carefully maintained was dissolving like mist in the sun. That night, Sophia made a decision. T was in her room getting ready for bed when she looked at the door. She religiously locked every night. The door that separated her from Ethan, from the rest of the house, from the world. For weeks, that door had been her protection, her refuge, the only thing over which she had control. But something had changed. She had changed. With her heart racing, she walked to the door and turned the key, unlocking it. Then, hesitantly, she opened it just a few inches, enough so it was no longer completely closed. But not so much that it seemed like an obvious invitation. It was a small gesture, insignificant to anyone else, but for Sophia, it was monumental. It was saying without words that she was no longer so afraid, that she was for the first time allowing the possibility that he could enter, not just the room, but her life, her heart. She lay down on the bed, her heart still racing, wondering if he would notice, if he would come, if she was being foolish, hoping for something that might never happen. Ethan noticed. Of course, he noticed. He passed through the hallway around midnight after hours, working in the office, trying to distract himself with spreadsheets and contracts. But failing miserably, his mind was full of Sophia, The way she'd laughed that afternoon, the way she'd touched his hands, the way she'd looked at him as if he were more than just the cold, calculating man everyone believed him to be. When he passed by her bedroom door, he stopped. The door was ajar. His heart raced. He knew what that meant. He knew Sophia always locked the door, always, and now it was open a gap. A silent permission. He stood there for long minutes, his hand hovering over the handle, fighting with himself. The rational part of his mind screamed for him to keep walking, not to cross that line, not to complicate an already confusing situation even further. But there was another part, a deeper, wilder, truer part, that wanted to enter, that needed to be close to her. In the end, he didn't go in, but he also didn't walk away. He stood there outside the half-open door, just listening to her soft breathing, knowing she was on the other side, knowing she was waiting. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, of desire unconsummated but deeply felt, both knew there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the closeness between them intensified in subtle but undeniable ways. They began having breakfast together, not in uncomfortable silence as before, but talking about small things at first. The weather, the books they were reading, news that Ethan read in the paper that he thought might interest her. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Sophia talked about her childhood, about the grandmother who raised her, about the dreams she had to abandon when her father went bankrupt. Ethan talked about the pressure of carrying the Harrington name, about impossible expectations, about the loneliness of always being at the top, but never truly connected with anyone. They exchanged looks long, intense, loaded with meanings neither dared verbalize. When they passed each other in the hallway, their shoulders brushed, and neither pulled away. When she read in the library, he sat in the armchair beside her, pretending to work on his laptop, but actually just watching her, memorizing every expression that crossed her face as she dove into stories. One night during dinner, Sophia made a joke about something they'd talked about that morning. Ethan laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that resonated through the dining room, and made Mabel, who was serving food, stop and look surprised. Sophia was surprised, too, but then she also laughed, and for a few precious moments, the mansion no longer seemed cold and empty, but warm and alive. When the laughter died, their eyes met across the table, and in that look, there was promise, there was desire, there was fear, there was hope. Ethan slowly stood up, walking around the table. Sophia froze, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. He stopped beside her chair, looking down, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that left her breathless. "Sophia," he began, his voice loaded with emotion, "I need you to know, I'm not good at this, at feeling, at connecting, but with you, I can't help it." Sophia stood up, facing him, so close. Their bodies almost touched. "I don't know what I'm doing either," she admitted, her voice trembling but honest. "But I know that when you're around, I don't feel so alone anymore." Ethan raised his hand, his fingers brushing her cheek with a delicacy that completely contrasted with the strength she knew he possessed. "You're not alone. Not anymore." And then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she closed her eyes, her heart racing, her lips parted in anticipation, but the kiss didn't come. Not yet. Ethan stopped millimeters away, his nose brushing hers, her warm breath mixing with his. "When I kiss you," he whispered, each word a promise and a warning. "It won't be just a kiss. It will be everything. You understand?" Sophia opened her eyes, meeting his, and in that moment, she understood. He was offering more than just physical contact. He was offering himself, all broken, complicated, too intense, and she was ready to accept. "I understand," she whispered back. Ethan smiled, a small, vulnerable smile she'd never seen before. Then he kissed her forehead gently, lingeringly, before pulling away. "Good night, Sophia." "Good night, Ethan." And as he left the dining room, Sophia remained there, her fingers touching her forehead where his lips had been, knowing that something irreversible had just happened between them. Her bedroom door would remain ajar that night, and every night after, waiting, inviting, promising. The tension in the following days was almost palpable. Like electricity in the air before a storm, Ethan and Sophia circled around each other like planets locked in orbit, drawn by a gravitational force neither could control, but still maintaining that minimum distance, that last remnant of restraint that threatened to break at any moment. Sophia felt like she was walking a tightrope. Every look Ethan cast in her direction was loaded with unfulfilled promises. Every time he passed near her and his fingers accidentally brushed hers, It was as if an electric current ran through her entire body. She could barely sleep, lying in the darkness of the room with the door ajar, listening to the sounds of the sleeping mansion, wondering if he would come, if he would finally cross that invisible line they'd drawn between them. Ethan was at war with himself. The rational part of his mind, the part that had been trained since childhood to control emotions, to never be carried away by impulses, to always maintain command, screamed for him to keep his distance. But there was another part, a part that had been buried and suffocated for years, that now refused to be silenced. That part wanted Sophia with an intensity that frightened him. Not just her body, though God knew he desired her physically in a way that bordered on obsession, but he wanted more. He wanted her laughter, her company, her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. He wanted everything. It was Ethan's mother, Eleanor Harrington, who set off the bomb that would finally make everything collapse. Eleanor was a woman who had been molded by high society, elegant, impeccable, cold as marble, and equally inflexible. She disapproved of the marriage from the start, not because Sophia was unworthy per se, but because she saw the marriage as a poorly calculated business merger. William Langford had nothing left to offer but debts and shame, and Eleanor couldn't understand why Richard had insisted on that arrangement. She arrived at the mansion on a Thursday afternoon unannounced, as she always did when she wanted to make it clear that this was still, in her mind, the Harrington house, not Ethan's, and certainly not Sophia's. She wore an impeccable beige suit, her gray hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and carried that air of superiority that made anyone feel small just by being in her presence. Sophia was in the sitting room, flipping through an art book she'd found in the library. When Eleanor entered, she didn't knock. She simply walked in, her heels clicking on the marble with the precision of a metronome, and stopped in front of Sophia, looking her up and down with an expression that made it perfectly clear what she thought. "So, you're the new Mrs. Harrington," Eleanor said, her voice loaded with poorly disguised disdain. "I must say, I expected more." Sophia quickly stood up, the book almost falling from her hands. "Mrs. Harrington, I didn't know you were coming." "Clearly," Eleanor retorted, sitting in the armchair as if it were a throne. "Where is my son? He's in the office working. I can call him if you—" "No," Eleanor interrupted with an imperious wave of her hand. "Actually, I'd prefer to talk to you first alone." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. She sat down again, her hands clasped in her lap, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "About what, ma'am?" Eleanor smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile, only cold calculation. "About your role in this family, or rather, about your lack of one. I don't understand." "Of course you don't understand," Eleanor sighed, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. "Let me be clear. This marriage is a business transaction, nothing more. You were bought to clean up your father's debts and give Ethan the appearance of stability that investors value. But don't delude yourself into thinking you mean anything beyond that." Each word was a sharp knife stabbing into Sophia's chest. She felt tears burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall, not in front of this woman. "Ethan doesn't think that way," Sophia said, her voice trembling but defiant. What?" Eleanor interrupted, raising a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "He cares about you." "Oh, my dear, how touching in its innocence. My son is like his father, efficient, focused, incapable of genuine feelings. If he's being kind to you, it's only because he was trained to be polite. But love, real affection, that doesn't exist in Harrington DNA." "You're wrong," Sophia insisted, but her voice sounded less convinced now. Eleanor stood up, smoothing her impeccable suit. "We'll see. But let me give you some advice, woman to woman. Don't get attached. Don't create expectations, and especially don't delude yourself into thinking you can change a man like Ethan. Men like him don't change. They just tolerate." And with that, Eleanor left the room, leaving Sophia alone with the poisonous words echoing in her mind like a curse. When Ethan finally came down from the office a few hours later, it was already night. He looked for Sophia. It had become a habit, this impulse, to know where she was, to make sure she was okay. But she wasn't in the usual places. She wasn't in the library. She wasn't in the garden. She wasn't in the dining room. He finally found her on the back porch, sitting on a stone bench facing the garden, illuminated only by the crescent moon. She was curled up, her arms wrapped around her own body, as if trying to protect herself from the cold, though the night was mild. And even from a distance, he could see she was crying. Something inside Ethan broke. He crossed the porch in quick strides, stopping in front of her. "Sophia, what happened?" She raised her face, and Ethan saw tears shining in the moonlight. Her eyes red and swollen. "Your mother was here." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw clenching. He should have guessed, should have predicted that Eleanor couldn't stay away, couldn't resist the opportunity to poison everything he was trying to build. "What did she say?" he asked, though he already had a pretty good idea. "That I mean nothing, that I'm just a transaction, that you're just tolerating my presence." Sophia's voice broke on the last word, and more tears ran down her face. "And maybe she's right. Maybe I was an idiot for believing that—" "No," Ethan interrupted abruptly, kneeling in front of her, holding her face between his hands with an urgency that bordered on desperation. "No, she's wrong, completely wrong." Sophia stared at him, her eyes full of pain and doubt. "How can I know? How can I be sure this isn't just kindness, pity?" Ethan took a deep breath, and then for the first time in his adult life, he allowed the truth, raw, vulnerable, terrifying, to come out unfiltered. "Because I wake up every morning thinking about you. Because I can't walk through a room without looking for you. Because when you smile, something inside me that had been dead for years comes back to life." Because his voice became hoarse, loaded with emotion. "Because you're not alone anymore, Sophia. Neither am I. And that scares me more than any deal, any risk, anything I've ever faced." Sophia sobbed, her hands rising to cover his that still held her face. "Ethan, I don't know how to do this," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that left her breathless. "I don't know how to love someone. No one ever taught me. But with you I want to learn. I want to try." The wind blew at that moment, moving Sophia's loose hair. Ethan, still kneeling before her, raised one hand, and with a delicacy that contrasted with the urgency of his words, tucked the strand behind her ear, a gesture that had become intimate between them, a silent language, only they shared. Sophia closed her eyes, feeling his touch, feeling the sincerity in his words, vibrating in every fiber of her being. When she opened her eyes again, she whispered, "You're not alone anymore, Ethan. No matter what your mother or anyone else says, you have me." Ethan felt something shatter and rebuild simultaneously inside his chest. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, their faces so close that their breaths mixed warm and labored. "Can I kiss you?" he whispered, and there was a vulnerability in that question that made her realize how much this moment meant to him. It wasn't just desire, it was surrender. It was choice. It was him saying without words that she mattered more than control, more than fear, more than everything. Sophia didn't trust her voice to answer, so she just nodded, a small movement, almost imperceptible, but enough. Ethan closed the distance between them. The kiss began gently, his lips touching hers with reverent delicacy, as if she were something precious and fragile. He savored the moment, memorizing the texture of her lips, the slightly salty taste of the tears still wetting her face. Sophia sighed against his mouth, and that sound, so small, so involuntary, broke Ethan's last thread of restraint. The kiss deepened. His hands slid from her face to her hair, his fingers intertwining in the soft strands as he pulled her closer. Sophia's mouth opened under his, and his tongue found hers in a dance that was both new and strangely familiar, as if their bodies knew something their minds were still trying to process. Sophia brought her hands to his chest, feeling his heart beating irregularly under her palm. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer. Desire growing inside her like a flame that had been lit and now refused to be extinguished. Ethan groaned against her mouth, a low, hoarse sound loaded with desire contained for too long. They kissed as if the world were ending, as if that were the only moment that mattered, as if they could heal all wounds, fill all voids, fix all broken parts through that simple yet infinitely complex contact. When they finally separated, both were breathless, their lips swollen, their eyes shining with a mix of desire, surprise, and something deeper that neither was ready to name. Ethan rested his forehead against hers again, eyes closed, trying to regain control over his breathing and the desire that threatened to consume him completely. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice loaded with promise. "If I don't stop now, don't stop," she interrupted, the words coming out before she could think twice. "Please don't stop." Ethan opened his eyes, staring at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And in that moment, under the crescent moon and the stars that witnessed silently, Ethan took Sophia by the hand and guided her back inside the mansion, climbing the stairs toward the room she'd kept ajar all those nights, waiting, inviting, promising the door would finally be completely opened. and what would happen on the other side would change everything between them forever. Ethan closed the bedroom door behind them with a soft click that echoed in the silence charged with anticipation. The room was bathed in the soft moonlight streaming through the windows, creating dancing shadows on the walls and wrapping everything in an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Sophia stood in the center of the room, trembling not from cold, but from a mixture of anticipation, nervousness, and desire pulsing through every nerve ending in her body. Ethan remained still for a moment, just watching her. The way the moonlight illuminated her profile, highlighting the delicate curve of her neck, the soft line of her shoulders, the way she breathed quick, labored as if she were about to dive into unknown waters. He could feel the weight of the moment, the enormity of what was about to happen. She had kept this her innocence, her intimacy, her body, her entire life, and now she was choosing to give it to him of all people. A man who had started out despising her, a man who had treated her with cruelty, a man who didn't deserve the gift she was offering, but he wanted her. God, how he wanted her, and more than that, he wanted to do this right. He wanted her first time to be everything she deserved: tenderness, reverence, passion, mixed with gentleness. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, giving her time to change her mind if she wanted. But Sophia didn't back away. Instead, she raised her chin, her eyes meeting his with a determination that was both brave and vulnerable. "You're trembling," he said softly, stopping in front of her, so close he could feel the heat emanating from her body. "I know," she whispered. "I'm nervous." "You don't need to be." Ethan raised his hands, placing them gently on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing small, comforting circles. "I'm going to take care of you. I promise." Sophia nodded, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "I trust you." Those 4 words hit Ethan like lightning. She trusted him. After everything, the cruelty of the wedding night, the harsh words, the coldness, she still chose to trust. He didn't deserve that, but he would do everything in his power to become worthy. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a soft, almost chaste kiss. Unlike the devouring kiss on the porch, this was a silent promise. "I'll go slow. I'll respect you. You're safe with me." His hands slid from her shoulders to her back, tracing the line of her spine over the fabric of the dress. Sophia sighed against his mouth, her body gradually relaxing under the gentle touch. Ethan deepened the kiss slowly, his tongue brushing her lower lip, asking permission. She granted it, and their tongues met in a slow, sensual dance that made both their blood boil. His hands found the zipper at the back of the dress. He paused, separating their lips just enough to whisper against her mouth. "May I?" "Yes," she breathed. And there was a surrender in that word, a yielding that went beyond the physical. Ethan pulled the zipper down slowly, the sound filling the room's silence. His hands followed the zipper's path, fingers brushing the exposed skin, leaving a trail of heat where they touched. Sophia shivered completely, a sigh escaping from her parted lips when the dress finally slid off her shoulders and fell to the floor in a whisper of fabric. Ethan stepped back just to look at her. She stood there, wearing only simple white lingerie, nothing provocative or elaborate, just pure and honest, like everything about her. And to Ethan, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "You're perfect," he said, his voice thick with barely contained desire. "Absolutely perfect." Sophia blushed, the flush spreading from her face to her neck and chest. She instinctively crossed her arms, trying to cover herself, but Ethan gently took her hands, moving them away. "No," he murmured. "Don't hide from me, never." He pulled her against him, and Sophia felt the solidity of his body against hers, the heat emanating through the shirt he still wore. His hands slid over her bare back, exploring every curve, every line, every inch of skin he could reach. His lips found her neck kissing, nibbling lightly, descending to her collarbone as Sophia tilted her head back, giving him access, small sounds of pleasure escaping involuntarily. "Ethan," she whispered, her hands gripping his shoulders, her legs beginning to weaken under the intensity of the sensations. He picked her up easily as if she weighed nothing and carried her to the bed. He laid her carefully on the soft sheets, and then stood beside the bed, removing his own shirt with deliberate movements. Sophia watched, mesmerized, as the fabric revealed his defined torso muscles, sculpted by regular exercise, tanned skin that contrasted with her paleness. Ethan joined her on the bed, lying beside her, propped up on one elbow so he could see her completely. His free hand traced a line from her face down her neck, stopping over her racing heart. He could feel the pulse under his palm, the erratic rhythm that mirrored his own. Your heart is racing, he murmured, his lips curving into a gentle smile. That's your fault, Sophia replied, and there was a touch of humor in her voice. Despite the nervousness, Ethan laughed softly and then leaned in to kiss her again, a long, deep kiss that stole the breath from both their lungs. As they kissed, his hands continued their exploration, sliding down her waist, over her hips, up the side of her body, until they found the clasp of her bra. He opened it with an ease that would have been impressive if Sophia weren't completely lost in the sensations consuming her. When the bra was removed, Ethan pulled back just to admire her again. His eyes traveled over every curve, every shadow, every detail, as if he were memorizing a work of art, and then, with a reverence that brought tears to Sophia's eyes, he leaned in and kissed her heart, not metaphorically, but literally, his lips landing on the left side of her chest, where her heart beat irregularly. "You're beautiful, Sophia," he whispered against her skin. "All of you. Your beauty, your strength, your purity. It's my honor to touch you, my honor to be here with you." Sophia couldn't hold back the tears, not from sadness, but from an emotion so intense, so overwhelming, that it couldn't be contained. Ethan saw the tears and immediately returned to her face, kissing them, each one of them, while murmuring words of comfort and adoration. "Don't cry, love. Please don't cry. It's not sadness," she managed to say, her voice choked. "It's just no one has ever made me feel like this. Like I'm special." "You are special," Ethan affirmed with absolute conviction. "You're the most special woman I've ever met." And then he continued his exploration, his lips descending down her neck, over her shoulders, stopping at her breasts. He touched them with reverence, his hands gentle but firm, his mouth following the path of his hands. Sophia arched her back, a moan escaping her lips as completely new sensations coursed through her body like waves of heat. Ethan devoted time to every part of her. There was no rush, no desperate urgency, just pure and simple adoration. His hands and mouth mapped every inch of skin, discovering what made her sigh, what made her moan, what made her writhe beneath him. When his hands finally slid down her belly, stopping at the elastic of the last piece of clothing still covering her, he paused again. "Do you still want this?" he asked, his eyes searching hers, looking for any sign of hesitation or doubt. "Yes," Sophia answered without hesitation. "I want you, Ethan. Completely." He removed the last barrier between them and then just watched her for a moment, completely naked, completely vulnerable, completely his. "Perfect," he whispered again, like a prayer. Ethan removed the rest of his own clothes and then returned to the bed, positioning himself over her, supporting his weight on his forearms so as not to crush her. Their bodies finally met, skin against skin, heat against heat, and both sides simultaneously, the contact sending flames through every nerve. "It might hurt at first," he warned gently, his eyes fixed on hers. "If it hurts, tell me. I'll go slow. Everything at your pace." Sophia nodded, her hands sliding over his back, feeling the tense muscles under his skin. "I trust you." Ethan kissed her a deep and tender kiss as his hands gently prepared her, making sure she was ready. And then, with infinite care, he began to join with her. Sophia felt the pressure, the strangeness, and then a sharp discomfort that made her contract involuntarily. Ethan stopped immediately. "Breathe," he whispered, kissing her face, her neck, trying to distract her from the pain. "Just breathe. Love, I'm here. You're safe." Sophia took a deep breath, forcing her body to relax, and gradually, the pain began to diminish, replaced by a sensation of fullness, of connection that went beyond the physical. "Continue," she whispered. "Please." Ethan obeyed, moving with excruciating slowness, giving her body time to adjust, to accept, and when they were finally completely united, he stopped again, resting his forehead against hers, eyes on eyes. Accelerated breaths mixing. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with restraint. "I am," Sophia replied, and there was wonder in her voice. "I'm more than okay." And then they began to move together slowly at first, finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. A dance their bodies performed instinctively. Sophia's hands gripped Ethan's back, her nails leaving small marks as the sensations intensified. His lips never stopped touching her, kissing, nibbling, whispering words of adoration and desire. "You have no idea," Ethan whispered against her lips, the rhythm gradually increasing. "How much I needed you. How much you complete me, Ethan." Sophia moaned, feeling something growing inside her, something that threatened to explode and consume her completely. "I'm here," he promised, one hand sliding between their bodies to touch where they were joined, increasing her pleasure. "Let go, love. I've got you." And Sophia did. She let all inhibitions, all fears, all doubts dissolve, as pleasure swept over her like a relentless wave. She cried out his name, her body arching, tightening around him in a way that brought Ethan to his own edge. He followed her moments later, his body trembling as he found his own release, her name a reverent whisper on his lips. And then, exhausted, he let himself fall beside her, immediately pulling her against his chest, wrapping her in his arms as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. They lay in the post-ecstasy silence, hearts beating in sync, breaths gradually returning to normal, bodies still entwined. Ethan kissed her forehead softly, then her temple, then her cheek. "You have no idea how much you've changed my life," he whispered in the darkness. The words loaded with an emotion so deep, it made Sophia snuggle even closer against him. "You changed mine too," she replied, her voice sleepy but happy. In every possible way, Ethan held her tighter, his chin resting on top of her head, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. For the first time in his adult life, he felt complete, as if a piece that had always been missing had finally fallen into place. And as Sophia fell asleep in his arms, safe and loved, Ethan made a silent promise. He would protect this, protect her, protect what they were building together, no matter the cost. But what he didn't know, as the night enveloped them in its temporary peace, was that storms were approaching, that forces beyond his control were already conspiring to destroy everything they'd just found, and that the happiness they felt in that moment would be tested in ways neither could imagine. The months following that night were the happiest Ethan and Sophia had ever experienced. The Harrington mansion, which had once seemed like a cold, lifeless mausoleum, transformed into something approaching a home. Mornings were marked by extended breakfasts where they talked about everything and nothing. They exchanged looks loaded with complicity and poorly disguised desire. Afternoons often found them in the garden, where Sophia continued to cultivate her flowers while Ethan worked on his laptop nearby, stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't noticing, though she always noticed and smiled to herself. The nights were theirs, completely theirs. They took refuge in the shared bedroom. Ethan had moved all his things to the master bedroom weeks ago, and there, in the sanctuary they'd created, they explored each other with a hunger that never seemed completely satisfied. Each touch was a discovery, each kiss a revelation. Each night together deepened the connection growing between them like a stubborn plant clinging to life. It was on a Tuesday morning, when autumn had already given way to winter and the first snowflakes were beginning to fall over New York, that Sophia discovered something that would change everything. She was in the bathroom, feeling a persistent nausea that had bothered her for the past few weeks. At first, she attributed it to stress. Eleanor had returned to making regular visits, always loaded with poisonous comments and disapproving looks, but the nausea didn't pass. And when her period didn't come at the expected time, a suspicion began to form in her mind. With trembling hands, Sophia took the pregnancy test she'd discreetly bought a few days before, and as she waited for the 3 longest minutes of her life, her heart beat so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. 2 lines positive. She was pregnant. Sophia let herself slide to the cold bathroom floor, tears streaming down her face. But not from sadness, from joy, from fear, from such a complex mixture of emotions that she could barely process. She was carrying Ethan's child, a part of him growing inside her. Physical proof of the love they'd built together. She needed to tell him, but how? When? She wanted the moment to be perfect, special, memorable, not just a casual announcement, but something that captured the enormity of what this meant for both of them. But fate, as often happens, had other plans. Claudia Voss had never gotten over the humiliation she suffered at the ball months ago. The way Ethan had publicly dismissed her, defending that insignificant woman he'd married, burned in her chest like acid. Claudia had been one of Ethan's conquests years ago, a brief, intense affair that was completely devoid of emotion on his part. But for her, it had been different. She had convinced herself she could be the exception, the woman who would finally break down Ethan Harrington's barriers and win not just his body, but his heart. Sophia had destroyed that dream. And Claudia wasn't the type of woman who forgave easily. It was during a business dinner in downtown Manhattan that Claudia found her unlikely ally, Derek Blackwell, a longtime rival of Ethan's in the corporate world. Derek was everything Ethan wasn't. Superficially charming, unscrupulously manipulative, and obsessed with destroying anyone who threatened his position at the top of the business hierarchy. And Ethan Harrington was exactly that type of threat. "You seem frustrated, dear Claudia," Derek commented. watching her from his place at the exclusive restaurant's table, a glass of red wine in hand. He was a man in his 40s, dark hair slicked back, calculating eyes that never missed a detail. "And you seem bored, dear Derek," she retorted, swirling her own glass of champagne. "I suppose we both have our demons." "Eth Harrington?" he asked directly, and the name alone made Claudia stiffen. Among others, Derek leaned forward, a smile forming on his lips. "What if I told you there's a way to, let's say, level the playing field?" Claudia raised a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "I'm listening." And so, at a corner table in an expensive restaurant surrounded by the murmur of conversations from other patrons who had no idea of the poison being distilled there, Claudia and Derek conspired. The plan was simple in its cruelty. Create evidence of an affair. Make Ethan believe that Sophia had deceived him, that the child she was carrying, because Derek had contacts and already knew about the pregnancy through an indiscreet employee at the clinic where Sophia had gone for tests, wasn't his. Photographs, Derek suggested, his fingers drumming on the glass, emails, text messages, all carefully crafted to seem authentic. "And how do we plan to get all that?" Claudia asked. Though she was already mentally committed to the plan. "Leave that to me," Derek replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have resources." It took 3 weeks for the trap to be carefully set. Photographs were digitally manipulated, showing Sophia in supposedly intimate meetings with a man actually an actor, hired by Derek, who had never been within 100 feet of Sophia. Emails were created in fake accounts with conversations that seemed intimate, suggesting a secret relationship that had begun even before the marriage to Ethan. Derek was meticulous. Every detail was checked and rechecked. The dates made sense. The locations were plausible. Everything was designed to seem real enough to plant the seed of doubt. And once planted, Derek knew that Ethan's own insecurity would do the rest of the work. The package was sent to Ethan's office on a Thursday afternoon, a large manila envelope, no return address, discreetly left with the receptionist, who placed it in the pile of Daily Mail without a second thought. When Ethan opened the envelope alone in his office, after all the employees had already left, he initially thought it was some kind of tasteless joke. The photographs spread across his mahogany desk seemed absurd. Sophia, his Sophia on dates with another man. Impossible. But then he saw the emails, read the messages, and something cold and poisonous began to coil around his heart. "I can't keep hiding what I feel. When can I see you again? Ethan never needs to know. This is just ours. The baby, what if it's yours?" Ethan felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The baby. Sophia had told him about the pregnancy just 2 days before, and he'd reacted with a joy he didn't even know he was capable of feeling. He'd held her face in his hands, kissed every inch of her face, made promises about the future they would build together, and now this. His rational mind screamed that something was wrong, that Sophia wasn't capable of this type of betrayal, that she loved him. He could see it in her eyes, feel it in her touch, hear it in her words. But the part of him that had been hurt before, the part that had learned since childhood to never trust completely, to always expect the worst from people, that part began to whisper poison. "Did you really think someone like her could love you? You who treated her like merchandise, you who bought her like an object. Of course she would look for affection elsewhere." Ethan picked up the phone with trembling hands. He called Marcus, his best friend and lawyer, the only man he trusted completely. "I need you to investigate something," he said when Marcus answered, his voice coming out strangely controlled despite the storm raging inside him. "And I need the truth. I don't care how painful it is." While Ethan dove into his spiral of doubt and rage, Sophia was at home completely unaware of the bomb that was about to explode. She was in the kitchen with Mabel, learning to make Ethan's favorite dish, a traditional stew that her housekeeper had perfected over the years. Sophia laughed at the stories Mabel told about Ethan as a child, imagining the serious, controlled man she knew as a mischievous, curious boy. "He used to steal cookies before dinner," Mabel recounted, her eyes shining with affection. "He thought no one noticed, but he always left crumbs along the way." "Hard to imagine Ethan being careless with anything," Sophia commented, stirring the stew in the pot, the rich smell filling the kitchen. "He was different as a child, lighter, more happy." Mabel paused, looking at Sophia with tenderness. "And he's becoming that boy again because of you." Sophia blushed, one hand instinctively going to her still flat belly. "I hope I can make him happy, him and our baby." "You already though, dear. Anyone with eyes can see." But Mabel was wrong, because when Ethan came home that night, there was no happiness in his eyes, There was only cold fire and barely contained fury. Sophia was in the sitting room reading when she heard the front door slam forcefully. She stood up quickly, the book falling to the floor, her heart racing with a bad feeling. Ethan entered the room like a storm, his face a mask of anger, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that made her instinctively back away. "Ethan, what happened?" He threw the envelope on the coffee table between them, the photographs and emails spreading out like condemning evidence in a courtroom. "Explain this," he said, his voice low but loaded with a fury so intense it made Sophia tremble. She looked at the photographs, confusion giving way to horror as she processed what she was seeing. I don't understand. What is this? You don't understand?" Ethan laughed, but the sound was bitter and broken. "These are photographs of you with another man. Emails suggesting an affair, a relationship that predates our marriage." "That's not true," Sophia screamed, tears already beginning to fall. "Ethan, I would never betray you. I love you." "Love?" He spat the word as if it were poison. "You really expect me to believe that after all this? Please." Sophia approached, extending her hands, but Ethan backed away as if her touch burned. "Please look at me. You know me. You know I would never do this." "I thought I knew," he said, and there was such deep pain in his voice, it almost broke Sophia completely. "But maybe I never did. Maybe everything was a lie from the beginning." "What about the baby?" Sophia whispered, her hand instinctively going to her belly. "Do you really think I would lie about that?" Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since entering, he hesitated. But then his eyes fell again on the photographs, on the emails, and doubt poisoned the moment of uncertainty. "Did you stage even that?" he asked, each word a sharp blade. "How much is this baby worth in the contract? How much do you think you can extract from me by pretending he's mine?" Sophia felt as if she'd been stabbed. The pain was physical, burning in her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. She staggered backward, her legs almost giving out beneath her. "How can you say that?" She sobbed, tears falling freely now. "How can you think so little of me?" "Because I was an idiot," Ethan said, turning his back to her, his hands clenching into fists. "I let my guard down. I believed, and that was my mistake." "Eth, please," Sophia begged, her voice breaking. "Investigate. Find out the truth. These photographs, these emails, they're not real. Someone is doing this. Someone wants to destroy us. Or maybe you're just a very good actress," he replied, and then left the room, climbing the stairs with heavy steps, leaving Sophia collapsing on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, to one hand protectively over the belly where their child was growing. That night, Sophia packed her bags not because she wanted to leave, but because she knew that staying in that house, in that state, would be poison for both her and the baby she carried. With a broken heart, she wrote a note short, because long words wouldn't change anything. "I loved you. May God forgive you." And before dawn, while Ethan was locked in the office drowning in whiskey and regret he still couldn't name Sophia, walked out the front door of the Harrington mansion for the last time. The taxi that took her away disappeared into the morning fog, carrying with it the only truly good thing Ethan Harrington had ever had, and he didn't even realize it until it was too late. The first days after Sophia's departure passed in a dense, suffocating fog. Ethan woke up every morning expecting to see her in the garden, planting her flowers, in the library, lost in a book, in the kitchen, chatting with Mabel, while learning some new recipe, but all he found was silence. A silence so heavy, so absolute, that it seemed to suck the air from his lungs and crush his chest with an invisible weight. The Harrington mansion returned to what it had always been before Sophia, a cold, lifeless mausoleum, a monument to empty wealth and aristocratic loneliness. The crystal chandeliers went back to casting sharp shadows instead of warmth. The hallways echoed each step with a melancholy that seemed to mock him. And the bedroom that had become a shared sanctuary, where they'd built intimacy and connection, was now just a painful reminder of everything he'd destroyed. Ethan refused to enter it. He slept in the office when he slept, which wasn't often. Most nights he spent sunk in the leather armchair, a bottle of whiskey beside him, staring at the photographs and emails that had detonated everything. And the more he looked, the more something inside him screamed that there was something wrong. The photographs seemed artificial, the angles too perfect, too professional, and the emails, Sophia would never write that way. She was direct, honest, incapable of subterfuge, but pride, that damned pride that had been cultivated in him since childhood, that said Harrington never admitted being wrong, never showed weakness, prevented him from acting on these suspicions. Instead, he sank deeper into alcohol, into anger directed at himself, into guilt that was beginning to corrode him like acid. It was Mabel who finally confronted him. The housekeeper had observed everything in silence during the first week. She'd seen Ethan deteriorate, seen the house lose all the life Sophia had brought. And she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She entered the office on a Tuesday afternoon without knocking, something she would normally never do, but desperate circumstances required desperate measures. Ethan was sitting behind the desk, his eyes red and swollen, an unkempt beard growing on the face that was always impeccable before. "You need to eat something," Mabel said, placing a tray of food on the desk. "I'm not hungry," Ethan murmured, not even looking at her. "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said you need to eat." Ethan raised his eyes, irritation flaring briefly. "Mabel, I don't have the patience for, she didn't do it." Mabel interrupted him, her voice firm and loaded with absolute conviction. Ethan froze. "What?" "Sophia, she didn't betray you. She wouldn't lie about the baby, and you know it deep in your stupid, proud heart. You know. You saw the evidence," he said. But his voice came out weak, without conviction. "Evidence can be fabricated," Mabel retorted, crossing her arms over her chest. "But a person's character, that can't be. I saw that girl every day. Saw the way she looked at you. How she talked about you. How her eyes lit up every time you entered a room. That can't be faked, Ethan. You don't understand," he began, but Mabel cut him off again. "No, you're the one who doesn't understand." She advanced, slamming her hands on the desk hard enough to make Ethan startle. "You didn't break a con artist's heart, boy. You destroyed the only woman who truly loved you, the only person on this cold, miserable earth who looked at you and saw more than a last name, more than a bank account. She saw you, and you threw that away based on what? Photographs, emails, paper can lie. Her heart never lied." The words hit Ethan like bullets, each one piercing the armor he tried to maintain. He closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists on the desk. "If I'm wrong," he whispered, his voice breaking. "If I'm wrong, Mabel, I destroyed everything. I destroyed the only good thing I ever had." "Then find out the truth," Mabel said, softer now, but no less firm. "Stop drowning in self-pity and fight for what you lost. If you truly loved her, if you truly love this child she's carrying, then you'll find her, and you'll beg on your knees for forgiveness." It was Marcus who brought the answers Ethan needed, but feared to find. Marcus had been investigating discreetly since Ethan asked him to, but unlike Ethan, he hadn't let himself be blinded by emotion. He'd followed every lead with the meticulousness of an experienced lawyer, verifying authenticity, tracing origins, interrogating sources, and what he discovered made his blood boil. He arrived at the mansion on a rainy night. 3 weeks after Sophia's departure, Ethan was in the office as always when Marcus entered without ceremony, throwing a folder on the desk. "Read this," he said, his voice tense with barely contained anger. Ethan opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside, there were reports from digital photography experts showing extensive manipulation of the images. There were banking transaction records linking Derek Blackwell to a talent agency, including the man in the photographs with Sophia. There were recordings of phone conversations between Claudia and Derek discussing the details of the setup. Everything was fake, every photograph, every email, every fragment of evidence that had destroyed his marriage, all fabricated with surgical precision by people who wanted to see him suffer. Ethan felt as if the world had collapsed around him. The folder fell from his hands, papers scattering across the office floor as he stood up abruptly, the chair toppling backward from the impact. "God," he whispered, his hands going to his face. "My God, what have I done?" "You were an idiot," Marcus said bluntly. "You let insecurity and pride destroy the only real thing you ever had, and now you need to fix it." "How?" Ethan shouted, turning to his friend, eyes wild. "How do I fix something like this? How do I look at her and ask forgiveness for believing the lies, for doubting her, for saying those horrible things about our child?" "You start by finding her," Marcus replied calmly, "and then you beg. You get on your knees. You cry. You do whatever it takes, because the alternative is spending the rest of your life knowing you destroyed the only person who truly loved you." Finding Sophia wasn't easy. She had disappeared completely. No digital trail, no banking transactions that could be traced, no contact with friends or family. It was as if she'd evaporated from the face of the earth. But Ethan didn't give up. He hired private investigators, offered rewards, followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. It took 2 weeks of tireless searching until he finally got an answer. Sophia had been seen in Willowbrook, a small village in the countryside about 3 hours north of New York. It was a discreet, quiet place, exactly the type of refuge someone would choose to hide and heal deep wounds. Ethan didn't wait. He got in the car and drove through the night rain beating on the windshield, heart racing, hands sweating on the steering wheel. He rehearsed 1,000 speeches in his head, apologies, explanations, promises. But all the words seemed insufficient before the enormity of what he'd done. When he arrived in Willowbrook, the sun was already rising, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. It was a picturesque town with wooden houses, cobblestone streets, and an air of tranquility that contrasted violently with the storm raging inside Ethan. He found Sophia sitting on a wooden bench in the main square, facing a small lake where ducks swam peacefully. She wore a thick wool coat that couldn't completely hide the belly that had grown. She was visibly pregnant now, the baby developing inside her despite all the pain and trauma she'd suffered. Ethan's heart almost stopped seeing her. She was thinner, her eyes had dark circles underneath, and there was a sadness in her that wasn't there before. A sadness he had put there. But even so, she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, and the love he felt for her, that love he tried to deny, that he tried to suffocate with anger and pride, exploded in his chest with a force that left him breathless. He approached slowly, each step heavy with fear and regret. Sophia looked up at the sound of footsteps, and when she saw who it was, her face paled. She stood up quickly, instinctively taking a step back. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "No, Ethan, please go away, Sophia. Please." Ethan extended his hands in a gesture of supplication. "Please, just listen to me. There's nothing you can say." Tears were already beginning to fall down her face. "You made it very clear what you think of me, of our baby." "I was wrong," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I was completely, terribly wrong. The photographs, the emails, everything was fake. Everything was set up by people who wanted to destroy us. And I was stupid enough to believe it." Sophia shook her head, more tears falling. "You should have trusted me. After everything we shared, after everything we built together, you should have known I would never betray you." "I know." Ethan took another step toward her, and when Sophia didn't back away, he continued until he was right in front of her. Then, to her complete shock, he knelt on the damp grass, his hands reaching out to hold hers. "I know, and it kills me. Because you're right. I should have trusted you. I should have fought for us instead of letting doubt destroy me." Sophia looked at him, the proud, powerful man she'd learned to love, now kneeling in front of her, tears streaming down his face, completely stripped of any pretense or pride. "Forgive me," he begged, his voice thick with emotion. "Please, Sophia, forgive me. I love you. I love you more than anything in this world. I love our child, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you give me a chance." "Ethan," she whispered, her own tears falling freely now. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he continued, his hands squeezing hers as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored. "I know I hurt you in ways that words can't fix, but I'm begging. Let me come back to you. Let me be here for you and our baby. Let me be the man you deserve." Sophia closed her eyes, pain battling against the love she still felt for him, a love that had never really disappeared, just hidden under layers of wounds and disappointment. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Ethan, really looked, seeing not just the pain he'd caused, but also the pain he was feeling, the genuine regret, the raw vulnerability he rarely showed anyone. "I don't know if I can," she began, her voice breaking. "Then don't decide now," Ethan said quickly. "Just let me stay. Let me be near you. I won't pressure you. I won't demand anything. Just please don't push me away completely." And in that moment, looking at the man who had broken her heart, but who had also been the first person to truly see her, Sophia made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. "You can stay," she whispered, "but you're going to have to earn my trust back. You're going to have to prove you've really changed." "I will," Ethan promised, kissing her hands repeatedly. "I swear on everything sacred I will." And as the sun continued to rise over Willowbrook, casting golden light on two broken hearts trying to find their way back to each other, a new journey began. A journey of forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of a love that this time would be strong enough to survive any storm. Ethan didn't return to New York, not that week or the next. He stayed in Willowbrook, renting a small room in a modest inn, a stark contrast to the marble and crystal mansion he called home. But he didn't care. Material comfort meant nothing without Sophia, without the chance to win back what he'd destroyed. He didn't try to force his presence into her life. He didn't show up unannounced, didn't make grand, dramatic gestures, didn't try to buy her forgiveness with expensive gifts or empty promises. Instead, he simply stayed. He stayed close enough for her to know he was there, but far enough away for her to have the space she needed to heal. Every morning, Ethan woke up early and walked to the small house Sophia had rented by the lake. He didn't knock on the door. He just left something on the porch. Fresh flowers he bought at the town's only flower shop. Sometimes coffee prepared exactly the way she liked it. Other times a basket of fruit from the local market. And always a handwritten note. Never long, never melodramatic, just true. Good morning. I hope you and our baby are well. I'm here if you need me. Always. Oh, the purple tulips are blooming again. Reminded me of you. Oh, I made so many mistakes, but loving you was never one of them. Sophia read every note. She kept them in a shoebox she hid in the closet, though she wasn't quite sure why. Maybe because despite the pain, part of her still wanted to believe, still wanted this to be real. It was on a Sunday afternoon 2 weeks after Ethan's arrival that Sophia finally gave in. She was at the local supermarket buying groceries when she felt a sharp pain in her lower back. She stopped in the middle of the aisle, leaning on the cart, breathing deeply as she waited for the pain to pass. The pregnancy was progressing. She was already in her 7th month, and her body was beginning to feel the weight. When she left the supermarket, heavy bags in her arms, Ethan was there. She didn't know how he'd found out where she was, but there he was, leaning against his rental car, eyes fixed on her with a mixture of concern and hesitation. "Let me help," he said, taking a step forward. Sophia hesitated. Every fiber of her pride screamed to refuse to keep the barriers up, but she was tired, so tired, and the bags were heavy, and her back ached, and the baby inside her seemed to be doing acrobatics. "Okay," she whispered, allowing him to take the bags. Ethan carried the groceries to her house, a tense but not uncomfortable silence between them. When they arrived, he put everything in the kitchen and turned to leave, giving her space as he always did. But then Sophia did something that surprised them both. "Do you want to stay for tea?" she asked, her voice low and hesitant. Ethan froze, slowly turning to face her. There was hope in his eyes, a cautious, fragile hope, as if he feared any sudden movement might break this moment. "I'd love to," he replied softly. And so for the first time in weeks, they sat together at Sophia's small kitchen table, drinking tea and eating homemade cookies she'd made the night before. The conversation started cautiously. Comments about the weather, about the town, about trivialities that didn't require vulnerability. But gradually, as the tea cooled in their cups and the sun began to set on the horizon, the conversation deepened. "How have you been feeling?" Ethan asked, his eyes lowering to her belly. "Tired?" Sophia admitted, one hand moving instinctively to caress the bump where the baby was growing. "He's very active lately. Kicks all night." "He," Ethan repeated, his voice becoming hoarse. "It's a boy." Sophia nodded, a small smile touching her lips for the first time since he'd arrived. "Yes, a boy." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the information. He was going to have a son, and he'd almost lost the chance to know him, to be present, to be a father. "What are you going to name him?" he asked when he opened his eyes again. Sophia was silent for a moment, studying his face. Then softly she said, "Noah, I thought about Noah." "Noah." Ethan tested the name, savoring it. "It's perfect." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, and then Ethan worked up the courage to ask what had been burning in his mind since he arrived. Do you think you could ever forgive me? Really?" Sophia looked at him at those amber eyes that had once been cold as ice, but now shone with raw emotion and vulnerability. She saw the deep circles under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights. She saw the uneven beard, so different from the always impeccable appearance he maintained. She saw a broken man trying to rebuild himself. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Part of me wants to, but another part, it still hurts so much, Ethan. The words you said, the things you believed about me, they left scars." "I know," he said, extending his hand across the table, stopping halfway, not daring to touch without permission. "And I'll spend the rest of my life carrying the guilt for that. But I want to try. I want to prove to you that I'm more than my worst moments, that I can be the man you and our son deserve." Sophia looked at his extended hand, and then slowly, hesitantly, she placed her own hand over his. The touch was electric, familiar, and comforting, even after everything. "Prove it, then," she whispered, "not with words, with actions." "I will," Ethan promised, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Every day for the rest of my life I will." And Ethan kept his promise. He woke up every morning and went to Sophia's house not to pressure, but to help. He cooked breakfast even though his culinary skills were limited, and the eggs frequently came out burned. He accompanied Sophia to prenatal appointments, sitting beside her while the doctor checked Noah's heartbeat through the ultrasound. And when Ethan heard that sound for the first time, the fast, strong rhythm of his son's heart, he cried. He cried openly, without shame, holding Sophia's hand as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. He fixed things around the house that were broken: a dripping faucet, a loose door hinge, a porch step that creaked. He read to her at night, sitting in a chair nearby while she reclined on the sofa, her swollen feet elevated on cushions. He read the same books she loved, and they discussed the stories, debated about characters, laughed together for the first time in months. Ethan didn't try to kiss her, didn't try to force physical intimacy. He understood that trust wasn't rebuilt through romantic gestures, but through constancy, through presence, through showing day after day that he wasn't going to disappear when things got difficult. And Sophia watched. She watched the way he tried, how he cared, how he dedicated himself not just to her, but to the son who hadn't even been born yet. She saw the transformation from the cold, controlled man she'd known to something softer, more human, more real. The barriers around her heart began to crack, not all at once, but gradually, like ice melting under the persistent sun. Noah was born on a cold February morning 3 weeks earlier than expected. Sophia woke up at 4:00 inches the morning with strong contractions that made her double over in pain. She grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed the only number she'd saved. Ethan's. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert despite the hour. "Sophia, it's happening," she managed to say between labored breaths. "The baby's coming. I'm on my way," Ethan said, and she could hear the sound of keys, of a door slamming. "Hang on, love. I'm coming." He arrived in 10 minutes. He must have broken every speed limit and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale with pain but determined. He helped her stand up, guided her to the car, and drove to the small Willowbrook hospital with his heart beating so hard he thought it would explode. Labor lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of pain, of fear, of Sophia squeezing Ethan's hand so hard his fingers turned white. He didn't leave her side for a second. He wiped the sweat from her face, whispered words of encouragement, breathed with her through each contraction, and when finally, the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room, Ethan felt as if his heart had exploded and rebuilt itself simultaneously. The doctor placed Noah in Ethan's arms first, a small, perfect baby with a tuft of dark hair and surprisingly strong lungs. Ethan looked at that wrinkled little face, at the closed little eyes, and something inside him that had been broken for so long finally healed. "Hello, Noah," he whispered, tears flowing freely down his face. "Hello, my son. Your daddy is here, and I promise I'll protect you and your mother forever." He turned to Sophia, who was lying on the bed, exhausted but radiant, watching father and son with tears in her own eyes. Ethan walked over to her, carefully placing Noah in her arms, and then knelt beside the bed. "Thank you," he said, his voice broken with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up, for giving birth to our son, for giving me a second chance I don't deserve." Sophia looked at him, at the man who had broken her heart, but who now cried with joy holding their son, and felt the last piece of ice around her heart melt completely. "Ethan," she whispered, one free hand reaching out to touch his face. "I forgive you. I really forgive you." And then she pulled him close, and their lips met in a soft kiss salty with tears, full of promises and second chances and love that had survived the worst and emerged stronger on the other side. 6 months later, the Harrington mansion was unrecognizable. Where there had once been silence, now there was laughter. From Noah, who was growing fast and already showed signs of having inherited the determined temperament of both parents. From Sophia, who had finally found her place not just in the mansion, but in the heart of the Harrington family. And from Ethan, who had discovered that laughing, feeling, loving wasn't weakness but the greatest strength a man could have. The garden that Sophia had started planting months before now bloomed in vibrant colors: purple tulips, red roses, white daisies. The library was no longer a solitary refuge but a shared space where they read together, while Noah slept in his nearby crib. The kitchen smelled of homemade cakes and stews that Sophia prepared with the enthusiastic help of Mabel, who never tired of thanking the heavens for having her boy back. The Ethan she always knew existed beneath all those layers of ice. Claudia and Derek faced the consequences of their actions. Marcus had made sure of that, filing lawsuits for defamation, manipulation, and conspiracy. Claudia lost her position in the high society she valued so much. and Derek saw his business empire begin to crumble under the weight of investigations and scandals, Ethan felt no satisfaction from their downfall, just a distant sadness for people who had wasted their lives feeding hatred and envy. Eleanor, surprisingly, had begun to change. When she saw Ethan holding his grandson for the first time, something in her heart of stone had cracked. She didn't become warm overnight. Decades of coldness didn't disappear easily, but she made small efforts. She visited regularly, brought gifts for Noah, and even on one memorable occasion had apologized to Sophia for her cruel words. It wasn't an eloquent or dramatic apology, just a simple, "I was wrong about you," but it meant the world. And Ethan and Sophia, they got married again. Not because they legally needed to technically, they were still married, but because they wanted to celebrate what they'd built, to renew their vows with true meaning this time. It was a small, intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden that Sophia had transformed with love and patience, only close family and true friends. And when Ethan saw Sophia walking toward him dressed in simple white, carrying Noah in her arms, he knew he'd finally found what he'd been looking for his whole life, without knowing he was looking for it. Not wealth, not power, not control, but home, family, love. That night, after the guests had left and Noah slept peacefully in his crib, Ethan and Sophia stood on the porch, watching the stars. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, pulling her closer, his arm wrapping around her waist. Sophia leaned into him, smiling. "More than I thought possible." "Me, too," he confessed, kissing the top of her head. "And it's all thanks to you. You saved me, Sophia, from myself, from my loneliness, from an empty life. I didn't even realize how empty it was. We saved each other," she corrected gently. "Because true love isn't perfection, Ethan. It's forgiveness. It's choosing each other day after day, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." Ethan turned her in his arms, looking deep into her eyes. "I choose you every day, forever. I choose you, and I choose you," Sophia replied, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. And as they kissed under the stars in the mansion that had finally become a true home, one thing became clear: the love that had been born from pain, grown in trust, and blossomed in forgiveness was indestructible. Because when two broken people meet and choose to heal together, they create something stronger than either of them could be alone. They create a family, a home, a future, and that in the end was all that really mattered. In the end, Ethan and Sophia discovered that true love isn't born from perfection but from forgiveness. That the strongest hearts are those that break and choose to rebuild together. He learned that control isn't power, vulnerability is. She discovered that her strength was never in protecting herself, but in allowing herself to love, even with fear. And Noah, he was born from the storm, but grew up surrounded by the light that only exists when two souls decide to fight for each other, no matter how many times they need to start over. After all, isn't that exactly what we're all searching for? Someone who chooses us even when we don't deserve it,